You're listening to Learning Leader Spotlight, interviews with corporate L&D leaders. On each episode, we sit down with key industry experts to discover more about what's happening in the world of learning and development, from current trends and insights to the most valuable lessons learned along the way. Join us for a fresh perspective on all things training and the best direction forward.
Welcome to Learning Leader Spotlight, where we interview the learning leaders of today to help the learning leaders of tomorrow. I'm your guest, Tracy D. Lufkin, and I'm a relationship manager with Training Pros, the sponsor of this podcast. Training Pros is a learning and development contract staffing company, and we like to say, when you have more projects than people, let us help you find the best consultant to start your project with confidence. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Phil Rhodes. Phil is a global learning leader at Phillips 66, focused on driving impact through leadership development, workforce capability, and modern learning strategies. Phil, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tracy D. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Let's start by giving your audience a quick overview of what you do at Phillips 66.
Sure, I am the Chief Learning Officer. So in that space, we support all learning and development across the enterprise. So that starts with new hire to compliance, safety, all the way to leadership development, our technical training, our early career programs, sponsoring just overall growth and mindset of an organization to focus on learning and curiosity.
Great. That sounds like a lot that's there.
Got a great team, so it's
Yeah,
not just me.
right. That's the team. It's all about the team for sure. And I know a couple of the folks on your team, and they are amazing. So I'm glad that you have them to support all these initiatives. So what first attracted you to the L&D field?
So I'm going to tell you a story. So I right out of college joined the Peace Corps. Up until then, I had 6 years of French under my belt in our education system. I had studied abroad in Luxembourg, so I was fluent. However, in 3 months in the Peace Corps, I was able to become fluent in a African language called Sesotho. And the way in which we learned was all experiential. In that space, because most of the people in my village and country were literate, it was all verbal listening and learning. So I was really, for the first time, introduced to experiential learning. Then when I came back, I worked at the headquarters of Peace Corps in their training and program management, but I became an outward bound instructor, which is also experiential learning. And it
Yes, it is
really
very
just
much.
piqued my interest in learning. If you juxtapose that sort of learning versus our classroom, rote memory kind of upbringing that I had, and I was successful in school and did well, but I was just captivated by that experiential learning focus. Then I went back and got my master's in organization development at American University, and it had a experiential learning component to it. It was done through the National Training Laboratory. So it was a partnership between American University and the National Training Laboratories, which really focused on T groups. So if you think of group settings, and
Mhm.
it just sparked my kind of awakening into how to really engage people in their learning. And then I had the opportunity as an OD consultant to just move into many different disciplines, but really landed in that learning and talent space, really focused on that behavioral shift. But how do you create immersive cohort learning experiences that are grounded in application? And so I don't know if I'm a purist, a truist, I don't know what I would call it, but that really is how I got my introduction. I truly took it from more of a science-based behavioral. How do you learn best as an individual? And as you know, in this space, that is what we do, right?
Mhm.
It's around if you're rolling out a new tool, rolling out a new process, rolling out a new product, anything. It's not around just training. It's around the ability to actually apply and utilize that. And how do you bring in methodologies and kind of sciences to help you do that?
Yeah, it really is. And I would say I'd call you an OG or one of the original founders of this happening because back then, I think it wasn't really experiential, it wasn't necessarily the focus as it is today.
Yeah, and so imagine, so this is 30 years ago, right?
Hmm.
So this was at the forefront. You think appreciative inquiry, a lot of these more innovative things I was doing in the nonprofit space, and then spreading that into kind of the for-profit, seeing a lot of success, a lot of been part of many product rollouts, many large-scale initiatives that have been highly successful. And they were really just done in a design space around experiential, immersive, bring in that change management, that ODY, what's in it for me. And then the other thing, Tracy D, is that kind of as I've gone through my career, more recently in the last few years, I've really shifted, and this gets into kind of tool product launches that I've been part of a lot of SAP, HCM conversions, where initially we just focused on the tool, on the
Mhm.
launch of the tool. Then we layered in, so once you're in the tool, what's the skill you need to really leverage the insights and applications? And then I've come to the space that really you have to focus on the mindset too. So there's a mindset, skill set, tool set, design thinking that needs to go into it. Because if you don't understand the why and the expectation, and you do that at all levels of an organization, then you move into skills and the tool. The tools most times the easiest to navigate, but it's really
Mhm.
why are we using it? What's the output? What are we going to measure? And then, what skill, what insights am I going to take from this new application? And so it's interesting. I've come full circle now that I've
Yeah,
not really thought of it, but I've come kind of full circle. And it's
you
interesting.
have.
It started so many years ago and it's the same design principle.
Isn't that interesting? And it's always been about with them, what's in it for me. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
I,
Now,
uh,
absolutely.
learned when I started off as a technical trainer back in the beginning of my career. It's you can learn best and get those concepts across if you understand what's in it for them and what is it that they need.
Yes. And then the other thing I think is also the role of a leader. Right? I
Mhm.
think we focused on the end users, and actually it's the leader who drives behavioral shift and, accountability, not L&D. So how do you
Mhm.
engage leaders in the enablement? And that mindset is so interesting because if you are not creating space for your leaders to understand this tension that's being created with the change, and they're not on board and able to advocate and explain it because they're the ones managing their employees, setting the expectations,
Mhm.
reinforcing it. It's our role to create the assets to do that, but, that mindset is so critical, especially in that role of a leader and then that role of the employee. I think for many times we just always put it on that employee, when in reality, they don't always own that, right? They own elements of that. But if you go back to your job and you're asked to do something different, guess what you do? You go right back to the old behavior.
You do.
And
You do.
and so this is
And
just some things I've learned throughout my career, and it's, and what that's also really done, Tracy D, is drives that alignment to the business because the business sets the strategy, the business sets their expectations, their measurement. How do we partner with them? And if this is included in that, this kind of mindset work with the leader, then it's being driven by the business, not by L&D, talent, OD, whatever group you're in.
exactly, and that's the key. I've spoken to several, other guests that say the same thing, so, it's definitely key to that, to have that, and you've been, I wouldn't say fortunate, but you have been in chief learning officer, head of learning, you've been head of L&D, a lot of different roles that has that seat at the table to be
Mhm.
able to have that impact,
Yes.
which is important to have that, and that role itself has developed over the years as it wasn't necessarily something back in the 30 years ago to have a seat at the table on the business side.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's good that you've been able to do
Yes.
that, make an impact.
Yeah, I was fortunate early in my career to work with really strong leaders who established that seat, and it was through influence and impact. And so that's kind of how I was mentored, it's the only way I know how to operate. And there's value that's had. We own a perspective, or we bring a perspective and insights and a discipline from a function that is sought after in an organization that's really operations focused. I work for operating companies, I always have. Yet there's, the largest resource in an operating company is human capital, right?
It
And
really
so
is.
how do you engage them to get the most productivity and get them aligned and engaged and feeling fulfilled in the work and while still representing their personal needs?
So you had a lot of impact, and you've talked about coming full circle with that. Would you say what else, in addition to that, are some of the most impactful changes that you've seen in L&D over the last few years?
Well, I think I started on this journey, if I go a few years, is around measurement and evaluation. Back to this aligning to the business needs, you have to be able to, as a leader and as a function and organization, be able to speak the language of the business, which is data and metrics and impact. And so I think really investing in that as a discipline and ensuring you've got the right skill sets in the organization, and then ensuring your entire organization, including myself, has the data at our fingertips so as we're speaking with leaders, we're speaking in a data-driven fashion, because that's how business leaders. So that I think that then the more recent, as you can imagine, is AI. We're fortunate. I'm fortunate to have been working on that in two phases. One, AI within the HR function, kind of the L&D talent function, and how do we leverage and utilize that? And then how do you build that capability at scale across an enterprise or an organization? And so they're similar but unique. And once again, the AI org readiness really sits in that space, or a mindset, skill set, tool set. But when you get within our discipline, it's really around continuous improvement and evolving and leveraging technology to enable us and our space to fill the void that is always most needed, which is consulting and engaging with our clients to create the most, engaging output for their employees. And so we've been able to really leverage that over the last few years to really drive efficiencies and put time back into that consulting space.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. And I would assume that that's part two of what you're going to see where the L&D space is headed in the next, say, 3 to 5 years. Is more and more of the AI, more and more of the data and measurement. What else would you foresee in our space?
Well, I think I mentioned one, but I think its leadership capability is absolutely paramount to the future.
Mhm.
And I think in that space, it's shifting L&D into an enablement space, not a deliverable space. I was kind of raised in a deliverable space. But if you start thinking about it broader around enablement, L&D enablement, it's around how do you equip, and many times it's the people leaders, the frontline people leaders, our managers, to really have the resources they need to empower their employees to make all of these changes and shifts and upskilling and early career development and investment that we have, and really understanding that L&D is just a slither of that time they have. But the more we can reinvest in that enablement of our leaders as strong leaders in the development and reinforcement of what they're doing, it's really just reinforcing this kind of career, this developmental mindset of a leader. So I think that's one area I think there's a lot of capability building that needs to be done. And underlying that is just this managing through change, managing through disruption. It is not going away, right? That's not shifting. So we just need to elevate that capability of our leaders. So that's one area. And then a third area I've become more passionate about recently in my last few roles is really tying that connection of the individual and their role to the business strategy. So I've labeled it business acumen, but it's
Mhm.
really understanding the business and the finances of the business and how the business makes money, but more importantly, connecting you and your role to the business. As we invest in learning and development and early career programs, we're trying to create pathways for folks to create careers within our organizations. That is one of the passions I have. And to do that, you need to understand where your role, where you as an individual fits into the organization. Because I think there's great power and grit and connectivity that happens when there's these headwinds of that is actually being ripped apart right now. And in reality, I think the organization has the ability to do that within that business acumen or business strategy. So that's another area. It's nothing new. I just think we have an opportunity to really fill a gap because the gap's kind of growing or seems to be part of almost what's happening within the cultural shift.
It does, and I think it's easier said than done, isn't it? It's so hard to execute that. I think that's where people struggle is how down to their different roles, it's such a big undertaking to be able to
Mhm.
do that, that I'm not sure some people know how to approach it or are effective in it. And then, the day-to-day job gets busy, everybody gets busy doing delivering. It's really
Mhm.
having to have that leadership to make the time and space to do so.
In my space, it's find a sponsor because everything's business driven, right?
Mhm.
It's not L&D driven and HR driven. It's sponsor driven. Work within the resources they have, and then it's that kind of almost demystifying it down to that individual, and then going back into that leadership enablement. Because that's back to a role of a leader. That is not a
Mhm.
role of a centralized function. It's the role of the leader to really have that. But that's not something we've ever built the capability in. They're all intersecting kind of those focus areas I'm seeing in the future.
They really are. And speaking of sponsors, I've known some really great sponsors that have also been mentors. So I'm curious who has been your most influential professional mentor?
So I had the opportunity early in my career to work with a CLO as a chief of staff. We were centralizing the learning function. What an incredible opportunity for me, Tracy D, to learn around the running L&D talent function as a business, how to centralize and create a data business kind of data-driven, insight-driven organization. We did a lot around impact stories and ROI. At one point, I remember I jokingly used to say when I went out with friends, all I feel like I do is run data to show impact to the business. I was a professional analysis. And at a time, we just didn't do that. And I was working with a sales group, so there was a little more connectivity there. That would be one. And then the other is I am part of the ATD, the Association for Talent Development, has an executive forum group, and I am active in that, have been active for years. And that's just an incredible think tank and sounding board for me. So not one-on-one mentoring, it's almost group mentoring, but I've leveraged my resources there and just our time together as a group or one-on-one to really be able to have a sounding board, hear new ideas, as well as kind of talk out loud and put on paper some ideas we have here.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm very much a proponent of ATD,
Yeah.
national, chapter, local, all of that. I've
Oh,
heard of
good.
but I really don't know much about the executive group. Do you guys meet quarterly?
We meet, it's called CTTO, the CTDO, Chief Talent Development Officers Group. We
Okay.
meet monthly
Oh,
for a
nice.
virtual session. And then at the ATD ICE conference, we can meet in person. And then there's a fall gathering and where the external speakers are brought in. There's a lot of best practice sharing. So that's where that mentoring comes in. But it's a monthly group that we have that meets once a month, as well as those in-person times.
Oh, that's wonderful, and that's what you need to keep that a problem that you have this month may not be a problem in 3 months that you need support with, so it's good that you have that. That's a great group. I'll have to add that to my list. Thinking about skills and talent, what do you think is the most important skill in talent right now?
I've been on this skill-based organization, skill-based kind of shift for the last few roles I've been in. Within the L&D space, I think it's really driven by your role. First of all, Tracy. So I'll talk about my role, which really is around data and insights, right? How do I ensure that I have data to speak to gaps within the organization that lead to opportunities to be able to speak to the business leaders? Now, in that is around consulting skills, relationship building skills, business acumen, all those things I've mentioned. What I've really learned is to build credibility, you have to speak the language of the business, and to speak the language of the business, you have to have data, right? And then be able to back that your initiatives and programs from a data-driven space. So at my level, I do think what I'm noticing, and I've had the fortune to work across almost every role in L&D. The only one I have not been, I'm not an instructional designer, like a certified, a designer, but I can design very much at the high level. And one thing I've noticed as we get more specialized in our function, how do you have those cross kind of skilled opportunities to really broaden your skill sets so that when you actually turn into that engagement space or that client facing group, if you're supporting finance or our field operations or, a corporate group, you have the ability to actually have those design influencing conversations as you're meeting with them versus waiting for the intake. And then, as we've all experienced, being told what they want you to do versus being really consultative. If I think it from a skill set, I think one, it's that data and analytics. I think it's consulting skills. I think there's a strong project management skill that's needed. And then I think you really need to understand instructional design.
I think so too. And I think that, as you mentioned, having that consultative mindset, you're not hearing it from another third party and how things get skewed when that happens. So having that ability to do that, I think makes it more accurate and more impactful.
You've got to work on what the business needs you to work on. And there are elements where you are influencing to work on gaps you see in the future. But there's that you got to be able to manage both. Knowing how to, I was on this recent, it was an HED at one of our monthly meetings, and it was around influence. And we were doing an exercise with an external leader in this space. And one of the questions, and it was very much around how do you influence an individual? And what I came to realize is that I rarely just work with an individual in a manner of influence. I work within a pod. Kind of learn this from, just how do you create a circle of influence so that it's not just your voice, but you're getting different voices across different disciplines in that space. And so as I think about influence, it's such an important skill wherever you are in the organization, but don't view it as a individual kind of
Mm,
responsibility and don't on yourself or one person, but how do you create that space to create a team and others who can influence with you and for you.
That's a great point, and I think, coming out of universities, a lot of our college graduates are taught it's all about what they say, what they do, so the more that they can learn to collaborate, the more they can be in those team environments, is critical for that type of thing, because I know for me, when I came out of it, it was all about what can I do to shine and
Mhm.
that was and be successful, and took a while to learn how to play in the sandbox, and I learned that that was really the best way to do it to be effective across the company.
Absolutely. And then you're not only are you effective, you're exponentially
Mm, yes.
effective, which then just broadens the impact and that you're able to have. And I kind of sit in that space. That's a space, what is the impact we're really having here? Right. And how do we and then back to measurement and evaluation and all
Mhm,
those pieces.
mhm, yeah, and have you found that when you find that there is little impact, or maybe this is not going as you planned, that you're able to easily pivot away from that into something else? Or is that a
Oh,
difficult thing to do?
absolutely. Absolutely. Working on an article right now around a test and learn environment. You could be test and learn, pilot, minimal viable product, whatever language you want to use. And I fortunately, Tracy, have worked in multiple industries. So the terminology is different. But what isn't different is, especially in the technology space, is technology isn't a solution. Technology is an enabler. But if you start with the technology, you're almost set up for failure. But if you
Mhm.
start with the objectives and you can scale something and do a test and learn manually, and I don't mean manually, like literally manually, but leveraging the existing processes you have in place and then bring in technology as a scaling solution, just bringing in this test and learn mentality. And I had the opportunity to learn this when I was part of a data and analytics group, so a truly agile scrum group. I was leading one of the teams was an L&D team. There were other components I was leading. And it's very difficult in our world to work in a Scrum Agile environment if you come from an ADDIE background. And what I learned in that opportunity was how we can hold to our ADDIE principles while being flexible and agile to meet the input and the speed with which things were changing. So you talked about pivoting, et cetera. What I said was it was just staying close to the customer, right? And we sped up our cycles to align to the agile scrum cycles, but we still had to do the same analysis, design, development,
Sure.
implementation. Then we overlaid a whole change management kind of ACAR to that. What I learned in that was the ability to be agile and create teams that could be stood up and stood down quickly for like 3 or 6 month sprints. And it was a great opportunity to almost test and learn something that I have
Yeah.
brought throughout all of my career now.
Oh, that's wonderful, and I think it's super critical now with AI.
It is the antithesis of it.
It is, it is, it is. I have a 20-something-year-old that is not a huge proponent of AI, and I'm constantly getting articles every day about how it's going to destroy everything, and it's just the mentality of everybody has a different viewpoint on it too,
Mhm.
and people just don't understand it to its full capability, or they over rely on it. There's just so many different things, so it's just hard for people overall, that's for sure. So let me switch gears a little bit and ask about your favorite source for industry news and information.
At a kind of a theoretical conceptual, I can be kind of an academic geek at heart. I really like the Harvard Business Review. I think it gives you a broad scope of space. So I gravitate towards that. And then the other thing is just, I will say, books that are referred to me by colleagues and within my networks. So I'm just reading right now The Insight Driven Leader,
Oh, yeah.
which is a great book around data and analytics and how do you use data to gather insights to then consult and really support the business. So I would say it's that. And then I will say I do a lot on LinkedIn, right? I think there's great opportunity to see what others are recommending and going into their white papers or articles and things like that. So and then there's a group called Red Thread. Don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they do a lot of tech ed space, technology space. And as you can imagine, in my role in experience technology as an enabler, you just need to ensure that you're staying abreast of that so you're not led by the technology. So that's a newsletter or blog I follow.
Okay. Oh, definitely check that out, and we'll be sure and put that in the source for this podcast as well, so others can find that. Do you happen to remember the name? I forget. I know that book, The Insights.
I'm going to
or
grab it. It's right here. Hold
I'm
on.
like, who is the author on that again? I know that that is a popular one right now, and it's
It's
on my list.
Jenny. It's Jenny Dearborn and Kelly
Okay,
Ryder.
perfect. Thank you for sharing. Yes, the insight-driven leader. Wonderful. Well, we'll be
Yeah,
looking forward to hearing some insights maybe on that when you're done.
great. Thanks.
So is that the well, I guess that wouldn't be the one book you recommend right now since you're still reading it, but what would be the one book for someone moving into L&D leadership that you would recommend? If you could pick just one. And it's so
Yeah.
hard to pick just one. I understand if you need to have
Yeah,
a
so this one I have carried around for my whole career. I was introduced, so I mentioned I started as an OD consultant.
Mhm.
This is through Corn Ferry, so I'm not plugging them, but do you remember FYI for your improvement? Have you ever seen this?
I actually haven't, no.
So it's ahead of its time to be a strength-based book around strengths, and so you have a card sort in here. If you've ever heard of Gallup Strengths or Strength Finder, any of those. But this book, it's a competency framework. Like I'd mentioned, I'm really focused on skills and development. It's amazing because back 30, 25 years ago, I used to run consulting conversations with my clients internal using the card sort of Corn Ferry. So if you think of Corn Ferry, they're a leader in skills taxonomy and job architecture. This is how they started. So if I now once again, I'm a behavioralist. I came up from a change management background, but the framework of really assessing from a skills competency and then looking at strengths and opportunities down to a role, and then creating not only within an organization from a job architecture but really developing and growing and coaching to those skills to get proficiency and above has been kind of the cornerstone of one of the first things. So for me, not even going to don't be an order taker and ADDIE and all this really just sparked my passion in this space.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Oh my gosh, that we'll definitely add that to our list as well. And I could continue on and on. You have so many insights to give us, but I know we're running out of time. So I do want to go ahead and wrap up and say thank you for sharing your expertise today. It has been actually very enlightening, in addition to being a great conversation. So thank you.
Good. Well, thank you so much, and just I appreciate the time to share and enjoy seeing others on your podcast too, so I can learn from them too. So thank you.
Wonderful. Yes. And we always try to put together a report, an industry report that kind of compiles that information. I said there's actually one out now. It might be based on the podcast or it could be based on our benchmarking sessions that we have, but taking all of the great information from folks like you and compiling it into an industry report. I'll be sure and send that to you if you haven't seen it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Yes, you're welcome. Before we wrap up, I want to completely here, I want to express my sincere thanks in a meaningful way. And as a token of our appreciation for being on the show, Training Pros will plant 5 trees in your name. We have a charity initiative that focuses on planting trees around the world. And to date, we've planted over 5,000 trees. So we'll be adding 5 more in your honor and sending you a certificate so you can see where they're growing. Sometimes they tell us, usually it's for fire restoration, which is kind of I
Uh-huh.
think an important thing right now. So it's just a small way for us to say thank you for your time and
Oh, I was going
the
to do the
value.
same. Thank you. That's so thoughtful.
You are welcome. And
Yeah.
that's it for today on the Learning Leader Spotlight. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thanks for joining us for the latest episode of Learning Leader Spotlight, interviews with corporate L&D leaders. You'll find links in the show notes to any resources mentioned on today's show. If you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe so you never miss an episode and leave us a 5-star review.